Beyond the Gate, our Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood podcast. I'm Megan.
And I'm Meg.
And we are talking about episode 30, Ishvalan War of Extermination.
Yes. In this episode, as Edward hears Hawkeye's tale of a time when idealistic young soldiers were tasked with genocide, the horrors of the Ishvalan battlefield are revealed.
Yeah, this covers manga chapters 58, The Footsteps of Ruin, 59, The Immoral Alchemist, 60, In the Absence of God, and 61, The Hero of Ishval. And it covers basically a whole volume, pretty much a whole volume, volume 15, minus Scar's backstory. Scar's backstory is in volume 15, but of course we already saw that before in the anime. I'm not sure why they structured it the way they did, but the show isn't worse off for it anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think parts of this episode might be in the next chapter of volume 16, but that it wasn't enough worth mentioning, I don't think.
Well, I think we're going to have a lot to talk about this episode,
Oh,
so
yeah.
we will just jump right in. So the episode starts off with Mustang. He's talking to an older, bedridden man who he seems to be his master who has taught him alchemy. And he also was the one who figured out how to do flame alchemy. But he won't teach Mustang because Mustang has joined the military. His master doesn't want to give him that power. And Mustang at first is upset. He's like, why not? Because alchemy should be used for the people, and I joined the military to help people. He's very noble intentions.
Yeah, his voice also sounds younger. Like, Travis William made his voice sound a little more soft, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Like, unjaded.
Yeah, which clearly he is right now.
Yeah.
Because he thinks that joining the military is gonna allow him to help people. So his master tells him that he's finished his research and he is dying. And it seems like he's kind of just giving up on life a little bit. I don't know. That's kind of the vibe that I got in this scene.
Maybe.
But he asks Roy to take care of his daughter, and Roy calls him Master Hawkeye. So, like,
I wonder who his daughter could be.
Yeah, it's Riza. And she has his research. And then his master does die, and then we see Riza and Roy at her father's grave. And Roy again, he's so optimistic. He wants to make the world a better place. But he's like, oh, I bet you think that's childish. And Riza's like, there's nothing childish about caring, which I really like that line.
Yeah, I appreciate that sentiment. Like, he's very aware of the naivete of what he's saying, but she doesn't look down on him for it, and I think that's great because, like, while you want to know what the world is about and who's going to be against you, you don't want to give up all hope that you could make a difference. And I also wanted to make a note of the manga for this scene. So, Master Hawkeye is researching at a table or like in his study in his house when he dies. Riza actually walks in soon after he collapses, which would be terrible to walk in on a family member, who was just coughed up blood and keeled over. And Roy actually calls her by her first name. So they are and I think, definitely familiar with each other.
Yeah, I think in the anime, doesn't she, when they're at the grave, doesn't she call him Roy?
She might. Yeah. So, like, before the military got in the way, they were all buddy-buddy.
Yeah.
Nothing against the military in real life.
No, this is
in this
fictional
world, it ruins everything.
Yes. And then so that was all in the past, and then we go back to the present, and Ed is visiting Riza to return her gun. And first see Riza, she's showering, and we see that she has this really intricate tattoo on her back, but it's been, like, burned over in places. So we see that super, super briefly. And then Ed arrives, and it's Black Hayate attacks him. I don't know what
this happens a lot.
Yeah, I don't know why animals don't like him.
They can sense his pent-up anger.
Yeah. That's like the thing is that like animals are usually pretty good about like they get a vibe for people, so it's just like why don't they like Ed?
I know. Ed's a good person.
It's concerning to me. Yeah, exactly. It's like Ed is a good person. Maybe you're right. Maybe all his like secret pent-up rage is like blocking.
He's got a lot on his mind. If his mind is clouded, they might get a vibe from him or something.
Yeah. So he returns the gun. He tells Riza that he couldn't pull the trigger, and he tells her like what happened with Winry and how kind of helpless and weak he felt in that moment.
Yeah, in the manga he says, "I really am pathetic. I worry everyone. I can't take care of myself." He just looks very depressed, and he's confessing all of this to one of the only trusted adults in his life.
Yeah, and also I think that's also coming off of him being stuck in Gluttony's stomach, and like when he gets out, he realizes like how much he worried Al, and again there he's like, I'm so sorry. And it's just like, oh, poor baby.
He's such a good person.
He is. Riza, she's very wise. She tells him, you're just dwelling on the past because you made it back alive. And you need to focus on staying alive to protect Winry. And she says, you love her. And Ed does a spit take. He immediately he's like, no, like then I don't love her. I mean, I care for her. She's just a family friend.
Yes, and in the manga, Riza's having nothing of it. I think it's a thought bubble. It would have been funnier if it was a speech bubble. But she says, interesting. Methinks he doth protest too much.
Yes, classic.
But there's like, I don't know who drew it, but there's this really funny fan-made comic of like her saying that line, which is classic. It's one the fans all know. And then Ed turning it right back around on her. He's like, oh, well, you would know a lot about that, wouldn't you? Of course, referring to Roy. The artist is fantastic because the look on Riza's face is of absolute disgust. Like, how dare you turn this back around on me?
Yeah, I especially love in that moment, like when Ed spits, he like spits on Hayate and is like not happy about it. So Ed's just like, he's not good at making friends with animals.
No.
But then, sorry, I don't remember exactly how the conversation goes that leads to.
Yeah. So they were talking about just I don't know, the gun, how he couldn't pull the trigger, who he wants to protect, and just the guilt that comes with taking a life, I suppose, and the severity of it. And I think Ed just kind of sensitively broaches the topic because Riza is a sharpshooter in the military, and he's like asking her opinion on things.
Yeah, I don't know. He's so sweet, but he very hesitantly is like, is it okay if I ask you about what happened in Ishval?
Yeah. I really like that part in the chapter too. Like when you read it, he says, there are so many things I know nothing about. My ignorance is astounding. And I think I've said words like that in my life at one point, I am pretty sure, because I'm not into politics. I like history, but I don't remember a lot of what's considered important about our country in particular too. So sometimes I feel bad when like elections come around and I'm like, oh, who do I vote for? And I have to do a quick, search on the internet of like, what are the policies that these candidates support and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I do really like history though as well. So anyway, Ed asks her about Ishval, and then at the same moment we see that Scar also asks Marcoh about Ishval.
Yeah, and I wrote in our notes, you have to read the manga. I apologize in advance for a lot of manga notes for this episode, but something big to note is that we get a lot of scenes with Winry's parents helping the Ishvalans. You really have to read it for yourself, but you can see just how hard they're working to save lives, the support that they gain, the love of the Ishvalans that they receive. And I think there is also a scene of Winry's mom trying to save the life of a child, and she's working really hard because the kid is around Winry's age. And there's a brief little flashback scene, and it's Winry waiting at home looking very worried, and Al's sitting next to her, kind of looking at her concerned. And Ed, his eyes are in the distance, but he has his hand on top of Winry's head, like patting her. And also, the manga mentions the toll that the war took on Rizenbul in particular, and also how the countries surrounding Amestris were involved, which is great because we'll get more on the other countries a little bit in the anime, but they really don't go into all of them. There's like Kreta and can't remember the other one. There's a lot more than just Amestris and Shing and Ishval. So yeah, a lot of things happen in the manga that will give you insight into the world, and we also see a lot of familiar faces throughout the chapters.
All right, and so then we get the backstory on Ishval. So the Ishvalans, they are deeply religious and, let's say, like focused and resolute people, and I think they're part of Amestris, but they're kind of
a nation within a nation.
Yeah, exactly. But then as we know, the war started because the soldier shoots a child, and as we know, the soldier was Envy. And again, we see that focus on like the blue eyes and brown and blonde hair of the soldier, and then like the red eyes and the I guess white hair of the Ishvalan child. And then from that there's a 7-year war. Then if your issues in order, number 3066, to exterminate all the Ishvalans. And that's when they bring in the alchemists, which is like kind of crazy to me. That's like there's a 7-year war, and then they decided to exterminate the Ishvalans.
Yeah,
and that's when
just was on and on.
Yeah, and that's when the alchemists come in.
Yeah. And in the manga, any Ishvalans who were in the Amestrian military, because like you said, Ishval was in, the Amestrian orders. Any Ishvalans who were in the Amestrian military were rounded up and killed, used for the Philosopher's Stone. Lust is present for when their souls are like used to make the stone. And we also, throughout the scenes of the soldiers fighting in the war, we see Roa, who was one of the previous Greed's men, in some of the panels, and he's like in the Amestrian uniform. And if you remember, way back when we first met Greed, with his gang of chimeras, Roa said that he had been in the military.
I like the attention to detail and bringing back characters that, we know. Anyway, so then after this order was issued, basically the Amestrian army comes in and just starts to annihilate the people. It's very terrible. It's very hard to watch because they're getting just rounded up and shot, and I don't know. It's heartbreaking because it's just these people are innocent and they're just being slaughtered. And Riza in this moment, we see her acting as sniper, and then we also see alchemists carrying out their orders, and she says it's hard being a sniper and alchemist because you actually see your victims. It's not like normal soldiers who just shoot, and if they they don't necessarily see if what happens after that. And then we see some of the other people that we know. We see Roy and Hughes, and
Hughes, I missed you, man.
Yeah, and they're noticing how each other have changed. Roy tells Hughes that oh, you have the eyes of a killer. You've seen death and destruction. And also we do get this sweet moment where Hughes gets a letter from Gracia, and he's of course so excited. But he's also worried that because he's gone, that she's gonna get swept off her feet by
another man.
By another man, yeah.
Doesn't Roy say something like, "Stop fawning over her"? It happens in novels and movies all the time. The guy who just says stuff like that gets killed immediately.
Honestly, that's like kind of true.
Yeah.
But it's I don't know, one wholesome moment because he's like, I can make it through another day. And that's really, I don't know, when you're doing terrible things, that's really all you can do is like make it through another day. But then Hughes and Mustang meet up with Hawkeye, and they're all kind of questioning what they're doing, like all this destruction, like what is the purpose of this? And alchemy, it's being used to kill people when it should be used to protect them. And then while while they're discussing, that we finally meet this guy that we've met before, but he's been in prison. But it's Kimberly, and he's just, I don't know, he's kind of a jerk. He's very like no nonsense, I guess, and he's like, did you put on that uniform and expect you wouldn't have to kill?
Yeah.
And he basically
gets really annoyed when people just get off track of what they're ordered to do, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Also, another manga note about Riza, it's explicitly stated that she's new to the military. She's still in the academy, but she was sent to Israel because of her skill.
That's sad.
I know.
And then while they're discussing, what is the purpose of the war, we go back to Marcoh and Scar is kind of, asking the same question. And Marcoh tells him that the reason for the war was to make a Philosopher's Stone. And this is where we see Marcoh at the fifth laboratory, and he's using the Ishvalans to make a Philosopher's Stone. And this stone, it's given to Kimberly, who is known as the Crimson Alchemist. And that's when he turns the tide of the war, and the Ishvalans surrender.
Yeah. He's the Red Lotus alchemist in the manga. That might just be because we have the old translation, but I don't know, that one's Crimson Alchemist sounds cooler, but Red Lotus is kind of cool too. Like, I don't know, red for obvious reasons, but lotus in Greek mythology, like if you went to sleep in a lotus bed, you could be asleep for what you think is a day, but it ends up being like 100 years. So like it's this mythological, I'm not sure if that's what the intent was. I also know like lotus flowers might have a different meaning in different cultures, so I have to look up what it is in Japanese culture.
So after the people surrender, their leader offers his life in exchange for all his people, and the Fuhrer kind of laughs in his face, and he's like, why is your life worth more than everybody else's? He's like, a life is a life. Which, like,
yes,
you agree with that sentiment?
But it's like an act of humility to bring your leader to another leader to negotiate. So, yeah. I agree, but not entirely.
Yeah. Okay, again, I don't remember how the discussion on God came up, so if you remember that.
Sorry. Well, I think the Ishvalan, no, that's all right. I think the Ishvalan who surrenders to him is actually like the leader, but he's like specifically the religious leader. I'm not sure if they call him a priest or not, but he's like, you think offering yourself up, the Fear says, you think offering yourself up to me, will make a difference, a life is a life, all that stuff. And then he goes after their religion. He's relentless. And he says, your God was just created by humans. God was created by humans to inspire fear and promote order. So he's basically saying that you've got no power anyway. So he's really driving the knife in. And in the manga, he says, isn't your God just an idol created by those too weak to take responsibility for their own fates? And it's a phrase I've heard before in the real world, is like, especially pertaining to Christianity, is it's just something to help the weak to survive, which I have no problem admitting that I am a human and I am weak. But that's not why religion was created, and that's more like religion is more than just that. There's more to it. So he's just like sticking his nose up at these people, and it's so disrespectful. And Hughes is actually present for this conversation in the manga, and I think he asks the soldier next to him, like, "Hey, are you religious?" And the soldier's like, "I'm agnostic." And Hughes replies, and he's like, "Well, if I was religious, I wouldn't choose to follow Ishvala."
Interesting.
Yeah, I think the line of thought there was like, I wouldn't choose to follow him because he abandoned his people when they needed him most, which I've heard people say that the Ishvalans might be a direct comparison to a people group in Japan, like something that happened in Japan's history with a people group. But I would argue that you could also compare them to the Jews in the Holocaust, because I see a lot of similarities to that in history. And I'm sure that there were Jewish people thinking, why has God abandoned us? Because of these horrible things happened to us, because we are the people that God chose. So there's that to chew on. Happy times.
Yeah. Also, like, knowing, like, the Fuhrer is a homunculus also kind of, like,
yeah, everything he does and says
conversation.
Is based on equivalent exchange, like a life is a life and things like that.
Yeah, and just like his disdain for humans as well, and like they're inferior beings. So it's no wonder that he doesn't care so much for them. But anyway, so basically we see that confrontation, and then at the end we actually see the Fuhrer like at Ishval, and we see Mustang and Hughes, and they're like, we are as expendable as garbage. Like, basically they don't matter, and it's, I don't know, it's so sad.
Yeah.
And also they're just like kind of, what was the point of this whole war, and like why? And they're, just being made to follow orders that they don't necessarily agree with. But the military doesn't care. Anyway, so now the war is over, and we see Riza visit Mustang's office, and he assigns her to be his personal assistant. And I don't know, he asks her to take him out if he steps out of line. And they kind of have this mutual agreement and determination that they need to make up for what they did in Ishval. I don't know, I love this line from Riza, and she's like, I'll follow you into hell if you ask me to.
That may or may not come up in future episodes.
Yes, maybe.
Maybe.
So that's how, I mean, basically we see how Riza ended up working with Roy. So that's kind of the end of the history of Ishval, and we learn what Mustang's plan is. He wants to turn the Mestras, which is a military state, into a democratic one, and he also wants everyone who was involved in the Ishvalan war to pay for their crimes. And Ed's like, well, that's ridiculous. You guys were just following orders, and it was homunculi who were actually responsible. But Riza is like, well, we didn't stand up for what was right, and we carried out those orders. And she's like, but don't worry about that. You guys need to focus on getting your bodies back right now. Then we finally see Alphonse in this episode for the first time. He's leaving Dr. Knox's, and May is saying goodbye, and it's so cute, so adorable, because she's like, thank you, Mr. Armour. Al is like, oh, I'm not Mr. Armour, I'm Alphonse Elric. And she at first is like, oh, are you just like him, rude and mean and whatever. And he's like, I love him. He's like, how rude, I'm a gentleman and taller. And and then May, being the, I think, 11-year-old girl that she is, she like imagines this like very Princely Alphonse Elric. Yes.
I've got a picture from the next volume. So, volume 16, one of the opening images, it's Al, who looks absolutely like a knight in shining armor. He actually looks really good drawn like this. And May's in the background like swooning, and Ed's behind her with like this disgusted look on his face.
Awesome.
Yeah. I think it was cute. It was like her fantasies of Ed, before she got her hopes and dreams crushed. But this time, with Al, and she's just totally smitten with him. And in the manga, she says, "I really, really hope you get your original body back soon." And I was just like, "Thanks, I think."
Mm-hmm.
It's really cute. I also thought it was funny that as soon as she says, "You must look the same as Edward," he's like, "How rude!" Like he thinks Ed is ugly or something. But in the manga, he says, "I'm way taller than my brother. I don't look mean like him. I have a very nice face, clean cut, short blonde hair, and I'm a better fighter than my big brother. But I don't have a temper. I'm a gentleman."
Oh,
I love Al.
So that's the end of the episode, except there is actually a credit scene. Envy is delivering Marcoh his meal, and he goes in, and there is a headless body with vengeance written in blood on the wall. And so Marcoh is Scar. We assume that Scar killed Marcoh.
Yep. And that's the end of the episode, but I also had one more brief manga note. End of volume 15, there's that, death toll panel that the author always does for characters who have died, and, there's been a couple really funny ones, and one where there was no one who died at all, which is great. But in this one, because it covered the war, there's like this massive swarm of people arcing towards heaven, and in the foreground you see Mr. and Mrs. Rockbell just going, "Whoa!"
That's awesome.
Have to make light of it somehow, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, we also had voice actor notes, briefly. So, Riza's father is named Bertold Hawkeye. Oh, Bertold. Sorry. Just started watching Attack on Titan with Meg, guys. I finally did it. Anyway. So, Bertold Hawkeye is played by Robert Margreter. He actually passed away in 2015. But he played Rasputin from Soul Eater. He was the narrator from Fairy Tail and Uncle Doi from Wolf Children. And the second person we finally get to cover, Sulph J. Kimbley, who is played by Eric Vale, who is kind of a big name in voice acting. So you might know him as Tomura Shigaraki from My Hero Academia, Fanzel Kruger from Black Clover, and our personal favorite, Yuki Soma from Fruits Basket. Yuki!
One of my faves.
Awesome. Yeah. So, going into name meanings, Bertolt is from German origin, means bright strength or renowned leader. And Sulph, for Kimbley, his first name is Sulph. It's, according to Google, because I couldn't find any better resource, it means seriousness, thought, intuition, intent, and wisdom. And funny manga note, somebody asked Arakawa what the J stands for in his name, for his middle name, and according to her bonus extra page, she's like, Jan? I.e., she doesn't know. She just put an initial there. In Kimbley, a lot of Full Metal characters are named after military vehicles, so according to the wiki fandom, Kimbley might be named after a U.S. naval vessel, the USS Kimberly. Seems reasonable.
Interesting.
Yeah. One animation note I had was when they keep repeating the phrase "eyes of the killer," they make the eyes like have lines underneath them. They just look really tired to me, honestly. But there's also like a dullness to their gazes too. Also making the characters look older, because this is kind of like a time skip moment. We're going to the past and then back to the present. They did that really well with Riza, I think, like her hair growing out, her face getting a little more mature looking, because she's a bit younger than Roy, so she had more maturity to her. And Roy does look a little bit older too, so I liked seeing that. And it's also drawn really well in the manga. We did have a philosophical kind of analysis to do.
A few.
Well, yeah, a few, because this episode was kind of rich with them.
Yeah. The first one, I guess, is, well, you already covered it pretty well. But basically, the Fuhrer, when he was discussing, like, God being a construct and basically created to inspire fear and promote order. And honestly, like, for me, I think I disagree with that. I would say that it's people that they twist religion and use it for their own gain, basically.
Yeah.
Like they're using the religion as an excuse to do the things that they're doing, like
right. Well, an example just popped into my head, like back during the Civil War when slavery was a thing. Plantation owners would let their slaves come to church, like, you know, a black church, you know, versus a white church, of course, but they would teach them about God and Jesus to make sure they read the verse about servants obey your masters. So they
and they would like purposely take things, like specific things, out of the Bible.
Right. Yeah, probably taking out that whole year of Jubilee thing out of the Bible too, to not teach them that. In case there are listeners who aren't familiar with that, it was a law that the Jews followed, which basically, I think it was oh boy, I can't remember which generation it was, but there was a time when they would be forced to free all of their slaves. Like, you couldn't keep them forever. It was like every 40 years or something like that. I have to go back and read one of those really long books of the Bible that make me just shiver trying to read.
Yeah, I think, like, it's more how people interpret religion than what it actually is saying. It's interesting. I mean, obviously, in this world, the religion is not real.
Right.
But in the real world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously we're going to get to this point next, the comparisons to Nazi Germany and the Jews and stuff. But when we first started watching the show, I think what popped into my head with Ishvalan and stuff was like Islam. I don't know. My brain just kind of like thought like, you know, a Middle Eastern religion having to do with a god and like, you know, life is sacred, nature is sacred kind of ideals is what I got from it. I could be totally off base.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of goes into our, you know, discussion on the comparisons and similarities to a real world scenario with Nazi Germany, which actually I was reminded of this while I was doing some research, but in the original Full Metal, that is actually like a thing. They go to the the real
movie,
and
Hitler
like
is animated in the movie.
Yeah. So it's very strange. But that is a thing.
They went into like the parallel worlds theory a little bit there.
Yeah. And so basically, it's kind of not clear if the author like actually was like, yes, this is based on Nazi Germany. And she's kind of actually said like not exactly. She used a mixture of different like European countries and like time periods to create the world. But there's definitely similarities. Like there's a lot of characters with German names. I don't know if you can remember which ones specifically. I mean, well, we just obviously that one, you just mentioned it. But I don't know, is Alphonse one? I can't remember. I think it is. But there's, you know, multiple characters and that have German names, and then obviously the Führer, that is German. Okay, and then also obviously this world is very, or Amestris at least, is very militarized, which was also the case for Nazi Germany. And then there's also the focus on like the blonde hair and blue eyes of the Amestrians.
The Aryan perfection.
Yes, which is the Nazis' idea, of perfection.
You and I would be in trouble.
Yeah. Well, okay. What's interesting though is
Hitler didn't have that complexion.
No, he didn't, and like a lot of Germans don't. Like, I mean, I am mostly German, and I think,
here.
Yeah, and like, no, I don't. I do actually have family members who are blonde hair, blue eyed, but it's about 50-50.
Right. And the strange thing is, so I have brown eyes. My dad has brown eyes, so he beat out my mom. But having brown eyes, that's the dominant feature. Like, if you have a parent with brown eyes and a parent with blue eyes, most likely you should have brown eyes. So I remember being in a science class in like middle school, and our teacher was talking about like Punnett squares and things like that and hereditary traits. And he was like, all right, look around the room, and most of you should have brown eyes. And he paused and he looked, he was like, wait a second, there's only like 4 of you with brown eyes. Everyone has blue eyes. What? And I was like, well, yeah, I grew up with a lot of blue-eyed kids. I thought having brown eyes was kind of rare. And my mom always says, well, that's just the part of the state where I grew up in, where we lived. It's like a lot of Scandinavian blood. So of course they all have blue eyes.
That's true. And that's kind of funny they mentioned that, because both of my parents had brown eyes. And okay, I'm going to say I'm like terrible at like noticing the color of people's eyes.
You may have mentioned that before.
Yeah. So like, even like, I know my mom has brown eyes, but my dad, they're not blue.
Is it kind of like greenish?
Yeah, they might be, because I know, like, anyway, I like half my siblings have blue eyes. Like neither of my parents have blue eyes, but half my siblings have blue eyes. So it's just it's interesting. Anyway, genetics is fun, but that's not what this podcast is about. So I guess
we could go into genetics, talking about how Ed and Al both ended up with their father's complexion and coloring versus their mom.
Yeah, we won't talk about that yet, but
yes,
maybe one day. Anyway, okay. So a few other similarities is obviously the extermination of like an entire people group, or the attempted extermination of entire people group, and that would be in Nazi Germany. They weren't just exterminating
Jews, disabled people, homosexuals, and it might have been another one too, but yeah, anyone who was deemed different or unhealthy, or just who had a stereotype placed upon them.
And then also in Amestris, there's a war going on in multiple fronts. So with Ishval, and then like they don't really go into detail, but Hughes was like mentioning like there's like multiple skirmishes with other countries, and like there's always war going on. And then in Germany, that was, they were fighting with basically the entire world. And then also human experimentation. I know in Nazi Germany I don't know too much about it because I'm
afraid to look up more about it.
Yeah, but I know like scientists would do experiments on people, very unethical experiments, which that's interesting in itself, because from that, that's where a lot of our laws and stuff were formed for ethical human experimentation.
And that directly correlates with Full Metal, because they were experimenting on their prisoners of war to make Philosopher's Stones.
Yeah. And then finally, the last one other thing that I wanted to mention is like an obsession with the occult, with the high-ranking officials.
Yes, that's...
Because, I mean, all of the leaders of the Amestrian army they're all in on the making
homunculi thing.
The homunculi thing, and and that was, again, like, I don't know too much about that, but I know there were elements of the occult in Nazi Germany as well. But that's just like, I mean, there is a lot of similarities between Nazi Germany and Amestris.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think I don't know. And it's interesting that the author isn't like super clear, like, yes, I base it on this. Like, she's more like, I took inspiration from multiple places, which I can also see that too, because
about all her concepts, really.
Yeah, which I think is, I actually don't mind, because then it gives you something to talk about, and like, what do you think the purpose of this was? I also read somewhere, which I think makes sense, is that she's also very inspired by the, like, what was like the Industrial Revolution.
Oh yeah, and that explains like the steampunk vibe.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting.
I don't know what it is about steampunk. I really like it.
Yeah. You do. You like the, like, cool. If you were in that world, you would for sure be an automobile mechanic.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, that we thought we would like talk about that briefly, and I'm sure later on we will discuss more. But I think in this episode, it becomes even more clear, like, the similarities. And also, okay, actually, this one more thing: when they were slaughtering all the Ishvalans, we saw they were like basically being like trapped in these pits and like shot, and that's something that happened in Nazi Germany, is that they would literally like line people up, shoot them and throw them in the pits, and then line up the next people, next group of people, and shoot them and throw them in the pits, and then just bury them. It's, what do I even say about that? Like,
kudos to her for like including these hard things in her story, because she had to research, obviously, to write, and I don't know, I like learning about history, but there's only so much you can really stomach before you gotta take a break, and there are certain stories that'll just stick with you and make you think, and it's not an easy thing to subject yourself to, but it is important to learn, so I'm very impressed and pleased that she took the time to dig into that stuff.
Yeah, even though it's hard, like, I love reading about history, and, I think it's very important to learn, see things from other people's perspectives, and, basically, I know, learn from the past so you don't make the same mistakes in the future.
Yes. I would also add that fantasy, as well as history, can play a big role in like developing you as a more empathetic person, because growing up, I've consumed a lot of media in all various forms, mostly books, but I think each of those stories has helped me see things from a new light, and hopefully made me more compassionate towards a bunch of people who may not see eye to eye with me. Hopefully,
Yeah.
I don't know for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. Basically, read more.
Read more books. It's good for you.
Yes. Okay. The last thing that we wanted to discuss was the concept of like following orders versus doing what is right.
That's tough.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't write anything down.
No, I think just like letting it hang there is kind of enough said, because I think Armstrong embodies that, but he saw what they were doing was wrong, and he was the first person to like break at it, but
he didn't
actively try to stop it. I'm not sure what he could have done in that situation though, but yeah, Roy and Riza acknowledged that what they did was wrong, and though Ed gives them an out and it's like, you're technically not responsible for it, they said they're still the ones who pulled the trigger or used the alchemy and destroyed things and hurt people and killed, and yeah, so I don't know what I would have done in their situation, but there is a time when soldiers have to stand up and say what we're doing is wrong, and there kind of is a moment like that in volume 15. Hughes is with another soldier, and like the commander is asking them to do something, like they're already at the end of their ropes with killing all these Ishvalans, but I think he commands them to like basically fight to the last man, like do something that will get more Amestrians killed and obviously more Ishvalans killed, and I believe it was the iron-blooded alchemist ends up shooting the commander and like killing him, and Hughes just mutters, "It was a stray bullet." Like they revolted against their commander.
Wow. Yeah, I think that is like I don't know. You're right. I can't imagine what I would actually do, but I hope that I would stand up and say this is wrong. I mean, like, just think about, like, again, with, like, Nazi Germany. Everybody knew, or a lot of people knew, like, this is wrong. This is, we shouldn't be doing this, but they just didn't, even if they didn't necessarily participate in it, they didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And they just let it happen.
I think it's different based on if you were a civilian or a soldier.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, that's true. But
on that note, there is a new show I want to check out sometime. I forgot which streaming platform it's on, but it's the story of the woman who hid Anne Frank and her family.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, the trailer looked awesome.
You should tell me if you find out where it's at.
Yeah. It's gonna be a sad one.
Oh, yeah. Seriously, anything about World War II is just, like, sad.
Brace yourself.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was all that we had for the episode.
Thanks for bearing with us. That was a lot.
Yes. Yeah. This is a heavy episode, but it is. I like it. I like that we get to see where everybody came from. Yeah, it started from, and I don't know. I like this episode, even though it's hard to watch.
Yeah.
All right. Megan, what was your favorite line?
My favorite line came from Kimberly. He's a character that, just putting it out there, I don't like him, but he often says things I agree with, which is weird because he's horrible. But his line in this,
kind of like Envy too.
Yeah. Again, Envy, I have said, is one of my favorite characters, but not for any moral reason, just because I enjoy a good villain in a story. But anyway, with Kimberly, he said something that kind of stuck out to me in this episode. The one thing worse than death is to avert your eyes from it. Look straight at the people you kill. Don't take your eyes off them for a second. And don't ever forget them, because I promise that they won't forget you. And when he said that, it's like, that, I could tell he's going to be a bad guy, but that advice was actually kind of sound on the battlefield, because he was telling this to Riza, and especially when he's like, don't forget them because they won't forget you, it almost sounded like an admonition mixed with encouragement in some weird way. Yeah, it was kind of heavy though. And what was your favorite line?
Yes, mine came from Roy, and it was after the war was over, and when he and Hughes were talking, and the line where they said, we're as expendable as garbage. But then he says, the power of man, it doesn't amount to much, but that doesn't matter. With what little strength I have, I'll do whatever it takes to protect the people I love, and in turn, they'll protect the ones they love. It seems the least we tiny humans can do for each other.
I like that one too.
Yeah. And I like that even after his naivete was destroyed, he still has hope, and he still has his, a moral compass and goals that he wants to achieve,
Yeah, I guess starting with the series, you could kind of see Mustang as like morally flawed. It's like, I want to be the leader of this country, but it's almost this desperation, like, I want to make this country better. I have a plan for how to do that, so I need to take control so I can get the right people in the right places.
Yeah. All right. What did we learn in this episode?
Take responsibility for your actions.
I like it.
Short,
and then
short and sweet.
Yep. Who pushed the story forward in this episode?
That would be Riza and Marcoh, because they were telling their stories about Ishvalan to the audience and to the respective characters they were speaking with.
Yes. All right. That's the end of this episode. It was a longer one, as we knew it would be.
The editor weeps.
Sorry, Megan.
That would be me.
All right. We will be back next week with another episode.
Yeah. Talk to you then.
Bye.